It's 2 in the morning in the Wind River Range of Wyoming, August 1885. A man sits alone beside a dying campfire at 9,000 feet elevation. Around him in the darkness, 10,000 sheep graze in a high mountain meadow. The nearest human being is 40 miles away. He hasn't spoken to another person in 3 months. He won't speak to another person for 3 more. The wind moves through the pines with a sound like distant conversation. But it's not conversation, it's just wind, and he knows the difference now. This is the story of the sheep herder, not the shepherd of pastoral poetry or biblical parable. This is the story of men who spent 6 to 8 months completely alone in wilderness, so remote that rescue was impossible, tending animals that attracted every predator in the mountains. Between 1870 and 1920, tens of thousands of sheep herders worked the high country of the American West. Most were Basque immigrants from the Pyrenees mountains between Spain and France. They came to America seeking opportunity and found something else entirely. Isolation so complete it changed them. When settlers and cattlemen first pushed into the West, they brought cattle. Cattle were familiar. Cattle were American. Cattle fit the mythology of the cowboy in the open range, but sheep were more profitable. A ewe could produce a lamb every year plus 8 to 12 pounds of wool. Sheep required less water than cattle. They could graze on terrain too steep for cows. They could survive on vegetation cattle wouldn't touch. And the wool market was booming as eastern textile mills consumed every pound producers could ship. By 1900, there were over 35 million sheep in the western states. Montana alone had 6 million. Wyoming had 5 million. Idaho, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, all had vast flocks numbering in the millions. Someone had to tend them, and that someone was usually alone. Many were Basque immigrants. The Basque region had a centuries-old tradition of mountain sheep herding. Young men would spend summers in high alpine pastures tending flocks, returning to villages in winter. It was lonely work, but it was respected work. It was skilled work. When drought and economic hardship hit the Basque region in the late 1800s, thousands emigrated to America. They heard about opportunities in the American West. Sheep operations needed herders. The work was familiar. What they didn't anticipate was the scale of American loneliness. In the Pyrenees, summer pastures were days from home. In America, summer pastures were months from anywhere. In the Pyrenees, you might encounter other herders, villagers, traders. In America, you might go an entire season without seeing another human face. The isolation was absolute. Here's how it worked. In late spring, a sheep outfit would hire a herder for the season. The herder would be provided with a flock, typically 1,500 to 3,000 sheep, sometimes as many as 10,000 if the range was good. He'd be given a wagon, a horse or mule, a couple of dogs, and basic supplies. Then he'd be sent into the mountains, alone. The sheep wagon was his entire world. These weren't covered wagons like you'd see on the Oregon Trail. These were specialized structures built specifically for solitary herders. Picture a small wooden cabin, maybe 12 feet long and 6 feet wide, mounted on wheels. Inside was everything a man needed to survive for months. A narrow bunk along one wall, a small wood stove for heat and cooking, shelves for food supplies, flour, beans, rice, coffee, salt, pork, maybe some canned goods, a fold-down table, a kerosene lantern, water barrels lashed outside. The smell inside was distinctive. Wool grease, wood smoke, coffee, unwashed human, and the particular mustiness of a space that never fully dried out. After months in the mountains, that smell soaked into everything a herder owned. The wagon was both shelter and prison. Many herders customized their wagons. They'd carve decorations into the wooden panels, paint scenes on the walls, mountains, villages they remembered from home, religious imagery. Some would hang photographs or religious icons, anything to make the space feel less empty. One herder carved an entire calendar into the wall beside his bunk, marking off each day with a knife scratch. By the end of the season, the wall looked like it had been attacked. But no amount of decoration changed the fundamental reality. You were alone. The herder's job was simple in theory. Move the flock to fresh grazing each day, keep them together, keep them safe from predators, keep them alive. In practice, it was endless vigilance. Sheep are not intelligent animals. They panic easily, they scatter, they fall off cliffs, they get stuck in ravines. A single sheep will find the only poisonous plant in a meadow and eat it. They wander into bogs and sink. They tangle themselves in deadfall, and they attract predators like nothing else in the mountains. The herder moved with the flock constantly. He'd wake before dawn and start them grazing. He'd follow as they spread across alpine meadows, keeping them bunched enough to control, but spread enough to graze efficiently. Walking, always walking, 10 miles a day, 15. More if the flock scattered or good grazing was distant. His boots would wear through in weeks. He'd patch them with whatever he had: wire, leather strips, canvas. Some herders wrapped their feet in burlap sacks when their boots finally disintegrated. He'd guide them toward water sources, mountain streams, alpine lakes, springs seeping from rock faces. Sheep needed water twice daily in summer. Finding reliable water determined everything about where you could graze, all day, every day, for months. The sun at high altitude was brutal. It burned exposed skin until it cracked and bled. Many herders wrapped bandanas around their faces and necks, developing permanent tan lines that marked them as mountain men when they finally returned to civilization. The thin air made everything harder. Climbing even gentle slopes left you gasping. Some herders developed chronic altitude sickness, headaches that never fully went away, nausea, exhaustion that rest couldn't cure. At night, he'd bed them down in a secure spot, preferably with rock outcroppings or trees at their backs to limit approach angles for predators. He'd position his wagon nearby. Then, he'd build a fire and sit and listen. Because nighttime was when the predators came. Grizzly bears were the worst. A grizzly could kill a dozen sheep in minutes, ripping through the flock in a frenzy of blood and wool. The sound was horrific: bleeding sheep tearing flesh, the deep grunting of a feeding bear. Black bears were nearly as bad. Mountain lions would take single animals, dragging them into the darkness so silently the herder might not know until morning when he counted the flock and came up short. Wolves hunted in packs, coordinating their attacks with intelligence that was almost human. They'd test the herder, probing different sides of the flock, looking for weakness in his defense. Coyotes were constant nuisances, probing the edges of the flock every night. A lamb that strayed even 20 feet from the main group was dead. The herder's defense was fire and noise and sleeplessness. He'd keep the fire burning all night, feeding it constantly. The light and smoke helped. He'd bang pots and pans if he heard movement in the darkness. He'd shout, fire his rifle into the air. Ammunition was precious, but sometimes the noise was worth it. Some herders would walk circles around the bedded sheep all night, making noise, keeping watch. They'd tie bells to their boots so the sound marked their position. Others would sleep in shifts, an hour asleep, an hour awake, all night long. This schedule destroyed any normal sleep pattern. After months of it, many herders could no longer sleep for more than an hour at a time, even when they returned to civilization. The dogs helped. Good sheepdogs were worth their weight in gold. They'd alert to danger before a human could detect it. Ears up, hackles raised, a low growl that meant something was out there in the darkness. They'd confront predators, barking and circling to drive them away. A good dog would stand between a wolf and the flock without hesitation, risking death to protect animals that weren't even its own species. Some dogs died protecting their flocks, killed by bears, torn apart by wolf packs, disappeared into darkness and never seen again. The herders buried them when they could find the bodies. They'd pile rocks over the graves, more cairns marking the mountain, and some men wept like they'd lost family. Because in a way, they had. The dogs were often their only companions. One herder in Idaho kept a journal that survived. In it, he recorded the death of his dog to a grizzly. July 18th, 1891, lost Chakor today. Good dog, brave dog. Now I am alone. The entry was in Basque, The man's name was never recorded, just his words, preserved by accident when someone found the journal decades later. The psychological toll of this isolation is hard for modern people to understand. Imagine going 3 months without hearing another human voice, not a conversation, not a greeting, not a casual comment about the weather, nothing, just your own voice, and the bleating of sheep, and the wind, and the silence beneath all of it. Many herders talk to themselves. They'd narrate their daily tasks out loud just to hear human speech. The sound of their own voices became strange to them, disconnected, like hearing a recording. They'd have conversations with their dogs, with the sheep, with the mountains themselves. They'd argue with rocks, debate with trees. Some sang constantly, old Basque songs, Spanish ballads, anything to break the silence. Their voices would echo off rock faces, creating the illusion of company. For a moment, it would sound like someone was singing back to them from across the valley, but it was always just their own voice, reflected. Others went silent. They'd stop talking entirely, even to themselves. When they finally returned to civilization at the end of the season, they'd struggle to form words. Their voices would crack from disuse. They'd forgotten how to have conversations, the rhythm of it, the back and forth, the social cues. Some never fully recovered the ability to engage in normal social interaction. The herders developed strange habits born of absolute solitude. Some would carve elaborate walking sticks, spending hours etching intricate designs into wood. These staffs became obsessive projects, geometric patterns, animal figures, religious symbols, scenes from memory, all carved with pocket knives over hundreds of hours. The work was meditative, the repetition soothing. Some of these staffs were genuine art, so detailed and ornate they looked like they belonged in museums. A few survive today. When you see them behind glass in regional museums, you're looking at hundreds of hours of loneliness transformed into craft. Others carved trees. Basque herders in particular left arbor glyphs, carvings on aspen bark. They'd peel away the outer bark to expose the white wood beneath, then carve their names, dates, messages, or drawings. The messages varied. Some were simple identification. Martin Erquitzia, 1918. Others were more elaborate, pictures of sheep, dogs, wagons, the herder's village back in Spain. Some included messages in Basque that most Americans couldn't read. Etzera Joan nahi dut, I want to go home. These carvings would heal into dark scars as the trees grew, creating permanent records of men who'd passed through. Hundreds of these arbor glyphs still exist today in the mountains of Idaho, Nevada, Wyoming, and California. Some date back to the 1880s. They're haunting to see. Names of men who died a century ago, preserved in living wood, proof that they existed and were alone in these mountains. Some messages are heartbreaking in their simplicity. One reads, Juan Achabal, 1903 solo, alone. Another, 1897, 6 months, no one. The carvings reveal something essential about human nature. Even when completely alone, people need to leave evidence of their existence. They need to mark their presence. They need to say, I was here. I mattered. I existed. The herders also built rock cairns, piles of stones stacked in seemingly random locations across the high country. Some marked trails or water sources. Others served no practical purpose except to give a man something to do with his hands. Building a cairn could take hours, selecting stones, testing their weight and shape, balancing them carefully, creating a structure that would outlast the builder. It was meditation, it was monument, it was proof that a human mind had been here, imposing order on wilderness. The isolation did something to time itself. Days blurred together, without calendars, without social markers, without any external structure. Time became elastic and strange. Some kept meticulous journals, marking off each day, recording weather and events. These journals became lifelines to sanity. The act of writing, of recording, of maintaining structure helped anchor them to reality. Others abandoned time entirely. It didn't matter what day it was. The only thing that mattered was light and dark, summer and winter, alive or dead. When supplies ran low, usually every 4 to 6 weeks, the herder would leave the flock with the dogs and ride to the nearest camp tender. This was usually 1 or 2 days' travel each way. The camp tender was a mobile supply depot, a man with a wagon full of provisions who traveled a circuit visiting herders. He'd carry flour, beans, coffee, tobacco, ammunition, matches, sometimes mail. That brief encounter might be the only human contact a herder had for months. The reunion was strange. 2 men who'd been isolated would meet in some remote meadow and suddenly have to remember how to interact. They'd exchange a few words, updates on weather, warnings about bear activity, news from other herders. They'd share a meal, though conversation often flagged. Then the herder would load his supplies, say goodbye, and return to his flock and his solitude. Some herders treasured these encounters, others found them painful, brief reminders of what human connection felt like, followed by the stark contrast of returning to silence. A few herders preferred the isolation. They'd been broken by the world somehow: war, loss, failure, disgrace. The mountains accepted them without judgment. The sheep didn't care about their pasts. The silence was refuge, not punishment. These men would work season after season, year after year, decades of solitude. They'd become legends among sheep outfits. The Basque who'd been herding for 30 years, who spoke to no one, who returned each spring to his mountain meadows like a migratory animal. When they finally died, alone in their wagons, killed by exposure or accident or simply old age, sometimes no one found them until the next season. A wagon would be discovered with a skeleton inside, the flock scattered or dead. Forest Service rangers and fellow herders would bury the man where he died, build a cairn, and mark it if they knew his name. Most went unmarked. The work ended each fall when snow began to threaten the high country. The herder would drive the flock down from the mountains to winter pastures at lower elevations or to railheads for shipment to market. Re-entering civilization was disorienting. Towns were loud, the sound of multiple voices, wagons, commerce. It was overwhelming. The presence of other people felt intrusive. Some herders would spend their winter wages on drinking binges, trying to drown the lingering silence inside their heads. Others would isolate themselves even in town, renting rooms and barely leaving them. They'd winter in Basque boarding houses in towns like Boise, Elko, or Bakersfield. These establishments served Basque food, spoke Basque, created small islands of familiar culture. But even among their own people, the herders often struggled. They'd sit silent at communal tables, unable to participate in conversations. Come spring, they'd return to the mountains. Because as hard as the isolation was, something about it called to them. The purity of it, the simplicity, the strange peace that came from having nothing but yourself and your work. When they reached the high meadows, some men reported feeling like they could finally breathe again. By the 1920s and 1930s, the era of the solitary herder was ending. Sheep operations consolidated. Fencing became more common. Roads penetrated deeper into the mountains. The Forest Service began regulating grazing on public lands. But for 50 years, from roughly 1870 to 1920, tens of thousands of men spent their summers in absolute isolation, tending millions of sheep in the highest, remotest corners of the American West. They left evidence of their passage: the arbor glyphs, the cairns, the carved walking sticks that occasionally surface in antique shops or museum collections. And they left something else, a tradition of solitary endurance that became part of the West's mythology, though it never received the romantic treatment that cowboys did. Because there was nothing romantic about it. There were no gunfights, no heroic cattle drives, no saloons or dance halls at the end of the trail. Just a man, alone with his thoughts and his work, sitting beside a dying fire at 9,000 feet, listening to the darkness for sounds of predators, counting the days until he could descend the mountain and remember what human voices sounded like. The sheep herders of the American West didn't build empires. They didn't fight wars. They didn't make headlines or get songs written about them. They just endured. And in enduring, they revealed something profound about human nature, that people can survive almost anything, even complete isolation, if they have a purpose. Even if that purpose is nothing more than keeping 10,000 sheep alive through one more night.